I've been running my own tuition business and doing supply teaching because I feel it's a really good way to utilise my skills, because I'm quite a flexible-minded teacher, so I can go with the children that I'm working with quite well. So it's really been a great pleasure to explore that side of teaching.
Excellent. And I'm Jannine, and I am also a teacher, but these days I work more as a one-to-one consultant or parent advocate, or trainer on neurodiverse conditions such as ADHD, autism, and increasingly dyslexia. And yeah, so my input is that I'll try. I like to look at things from a neurodiverse perspective. So the autism, the ADHD, the dyslexia, so children with differences. But actually, I think what we've put together today, which started off as about 80 slides and is now down to 17, because we just realised we had so much we wanted to share with you. So we sort of like filtered it down, and we're going to try to look at supporting learning at home through a neurodiverse lens. But actually that just means you've got some of the extremes, but everything is going to apply to all of our children. It's just that those with neurodiverse conditions are on the outside of things, and often the most challenging, you know, in some respects. So okay, so I am going to try to share my screen now. Okay, come on. Okie dokie. Okay, so that's me and Ruth. Okay, so one of the things that we became aware of when we first started putting this together is that parents are comparing themselves to other parents, and feeling the judgment of others. And we were talking about the lens through which that can be really quite problematic.
Definitely. It really is a case of don't believe everything you read or hear, because as we all know, it's really, if you see people who are looking like they're doing a perfect job and their children are perfectly happy and everything that they're doing is brilliant, then that might just be that they're showing the best side of themselves. That 1 minute of that day that it went well, and they wanted to celebrate that, and it just ends up making maybe some other people feel like they haven't lived up to that kind of expectation. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to one of my clients who on one particular day baked some bread with her child, and she put it on social media and got a whole sort of like influx of, oh my God, you're amazing. And she was just like, I just felt like such a fraud, because actually all I was trying to do was say, I made a loaf of bread. And she got this whole sort of barrage of people sort of like complimenting on her on managing to cope. And she's just like, I'm not actually. And I just felt like such a fraud, and like I'd given this wrong perception, because actually, you know what? None of us particularly shares when it's going bad. We just share when it's going well. So we have to be very careful that we are paying attention to that, and not thinking that everybody's best projection of themselves is the real situation. Because actually, do you know what? We're all just doing the best that we can with what we have and what we know. And when I was talking to Ruth yesterday, we were talking about the metaphoric school gate and comparing children within the same school.
Yes, yeah. So so the point that I was going to make there was that sometimes you get mentions of people week on week by maybe the teachers in my children's school in particular. There's been sort of a celebration of children doing particular things well, so maybe getting the most number of points on a game that they've been playing, that they've had a competition. And hearing that as a child that doesn't win the most number of points is quite difficult, even though the intention is probably just to celebrate somebody who did something good. So it's possibly got an effect on the children and on the parents then, that they feel like it's not going so well for them as it was for somebody else.
It's not helpful to compare ourselves to that. And obviously the teacher's not thinking about it like that. They're just wanting to sort of like celebrate like they would normally, but of course it can have an impact on us as parents supporting these young people, and also on the young people themselves. We also talked about, Ruth, you mentioned yesterday somebody who's got sort of like foreign language and trying to teach phonics to their child.
Yes, yeah. So I don't know whether it's the case that they communicated with the school themselves after this happened, but for the first 3 weeks, she actually asked me, she's from Slovakia, and she asked me to teach her daughter the phonics section, not because she's not intelligent or anything, but because she couldn't always get the right pronunciation of the different words that were spelt with the same sound. So I did feel at that point that it would have been a really good thing for somebody to say something to the school, and then maybe they did, because the following week the school released a 3-minute presentation that the children could listen to, wherein the teacher did all of the job that I'd been doing, probably not amazingly well because I'm not a phonics teacher, but yeah, so the teacher did it for them. So it was just a case of maybe somebody asked and then they got it, what they needed.
I struggled with my maths past a certain point. I've got a C in maths, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be a teacher, but it was a real stretch for me to get to that. So with my older children, for example, I would really struggle to support them in maths. But I would support them absolutely fine in English. And I think that it's a question of, well, I can do that bit with them, but maybe there's somebody else in the family that can do the other bits. And even if that's a bit remotely, or asking for someone such as Ruth to work through those things, or using online resources for one subject and not for another.
Yeah, and definitely the family have a massive role to play. They can really be very helpful if you've got family that, even if they live a really long way away, are prepared to help. Just sometimes my youngest daughter, sometimes just to sit with her grandmother and hear a story just to get her calm is really, really helpful. It just gives me 5 minutes to do something with the older one, and the younger one comes away happy, whereas she might have got into some sort of mischief. That would usually be the case.
Yeah, because if our children are under challenged or over challenged, mischief happens. And then we've got the issues such as special educational needs and disabilities. You're going to have your children with ADHD, for example, who are really going to struggle to sit still and actually need to move to learn. And at this precise moment in time, as an adult with ADHD, I can tell you I'm at my standing desk, and probably halfway through I will switch to my sitting desk. So sort of like having a mind for that sort of thing, that concentrating and doing your work doesn't necessarily mean being planted in the same space for the whole duration of things. Movement is key. If you've got 5 activities for your child and you put them in different areas of your house, you're helping them. But then you've got children with autism that might hate that, and children without autism that might hate that. So you have to go with your children. This is a beautiful opportunity for parents to deliver a very bespoke thing, but you have to remember that you're doing the best you can with what you have and what you know. We're not expecting people to be teachers, are not expecting parents to be teachers. Actually, did you train as a teacher? Most of you did not. So you know, there's lots of things that we know as teachers that parents don't know, and you can't do it the same way. You actually have to look at it differently in most regards.
Yeah, if you're a teacher, one of the key strengths of a teacher, one thing that makes a teacher really good, is that they maybe look at a class of 30 people and they can see the little things that each one of those people needs, and it only takes them maybe a few weeks, a good teacher, to get to grips with every single child's best working style, and the things that motivate them and things that don't motivate them. And they can then put those things into practice. And it might just be that with one of the children in the class, it's just a word or even a gesture or a look that makes all the difference, because they feel that they're able to continue with the task they were doing, even if they'd been feeling unsure, or redirecting them, or maybe extending them, taking them further so that they're not bored, supporting them if they can't do it. As parents, we may not have ever had to be in that position. So the contact with a teacher, please trust that the teachers, most of the time, 99% of teachers, will be so happy that you ask them to help their child, to give their input, to ask them for their expertise. They really, really are, a lot of them, worried about the children that they teach, and they want to be able to teach them again. So if you have a question, if you're worried, if you're concerned, if you're stressed out, ask the teachers, you know, email them, ask if you can speak to the school, ask if you can speak to somebody that that you get on well with in the school, if it's not necessarily the teacher that is the form tutor or the subject teacher, and try and get a response from the school, because they do care and they want to help.
I think it's also really important to recognise that we are not all in the same boat. We're experiencing the same storm, but we're going to be sitting in different boats with different situations and everything else. And again, coming down to that comparison, you can't do that because your situation is different to everybody else's. I am aware, because a lot of my clients are London based, of teenagers who are now have suddenly become young carers for their parents and are trying to actually deliver an education to their siblings. And therefore, and actually one case where that the teacher only became aware of that when she said, "Well done to those of you who have sent in your work. For those of you who haven't, please send it." And then got an email from the child saying, "I'm really sorry, I'll do it as soon as I can. My parents both ill." And actually, you know, and children are quite anxious about things as well, and to varying degrees. And children know more. Some children know more than others. Some have got more understanding. Some have more anxiety. So just steer away from comparing yourself to others and just do the best that you can with what you have and what you know. Do your best until you know better, and then do better. That's all you've got, it's all you can do. And when other people are unkind or judgy or rude, you don't have to own that. That's their opinion. Do we own the opinions of other people? Should we own the opinions of other people? Absolutely not. And I was looking for some information on how whether children were engaging in learning, and it's very difficult to get information on that yet because we're still quite early days. I did manage to find a statistic that 34% of children are currently accessing online lessons or resources, which means most are not. So if your children are, you are ahead of the game, going back to that comparison thing. And we don't want you to be just thinking you've got to be this perfect parent, because you really don't have to be this perfect parent. You are just you, doing the best that you can with what you have and what you know.
Yeah, be kind to yourselves, be kind to your children. It's okay if it's nearly 4 o'clock and you're supposed to hand things in by 4 o'clock and you're not finished because it just didn't happen that day. It really is okay to miss that deadline. It's not going to make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, just go easy on all of you. Go easy on the children, go easy on yourselves. It doesn't matter.
Also worth remembering that children do best when their school and their home, their families are working together, and there is a good relationship between the two. Now, obviously, you're only 50% of that relationship, but you're still a very powerful and influential 50% of that relationship. So keeping your communication professional and kind and considerate at all times is very, very important. It needs to be remembered, of course, that teachers, this is new to them. Teachers have never been taught to deliver, most teachers anyway, have never been taught to deliver an education online.
Yeah, and there's no guidance at all. There's nothing been specifically said about what schools should give. So just in my limited experience of being a tutor of the people that I'm working with at the moment, there's a vast difference between what different schools have given to their students to do. Some students have something very generic, just a list of tasks that they have to do. Other schools are being very prescriptive and they're giving them loads and loads of things. They're saying it all needs to be done. So that's just within schools, within children of the same age. Within children in very important year groups, you know, year 10, a lot of the students that I teach are in year 10, and what they've been given, some of them have just been given things they've done before. The teachers are maybe dealing with 120, 150, 200 children that they teach over the course of a week, and they've just done the best they can, and maybe some of them are now trying to back that up with more.
And I think it will get better over time, because when this first happened, we thought it was going to be 3 weeks, and then it was more. And we don't know what's going to happen moving forward. And I think that we may well do another webinar once we know, actually, because, you know, we don't know how long this is going to go on for at the moment. So there are definitely issues with the work coming out being too much. Schools thinking, do you know what, I'll just throw the kitchen sink at it. There's definitely issues where there's too little coming out, and then you've got the issues for your particular child in all of that, and that what we call differentiation, and that means looking at the learning objectives and how we need to make that different for each child in our class. That's what we do as teachers, which is really, really hard to do remotely.
And so I think and differentiation as well can mean in a classroom, it may not mean that the brighter children do more and the less bright children do less, but you may find that you've got a bright child who has to work through all of the boring stuff before they get to something that's the appropriate challenge for them. Maybe again a conversation with the school would mean that they only have to do the last 5 questions out of 10 or 8, so the last few questions, and skip the ones that are too easy so that they don't get bored.
That's good advice.
I think overall schools just want the children to come back in one piece. They don't want broken people. They want them to come back happy and healthy, and then they'll be able to learn when they get back.
Mental health is massively important, actually. Emotional well-being. Children have their security pulled away from underneath them, and as parents and educators, the responsibility is to shore that up first, because children can't learn if they're not actually okay. So it is definitely a question of lots of hugs and love and reassurance, and explaining things in simple terms that don't increase anxiety, but just spending a lot of time listening, I think, is really, really a good idea. Schools don't know what's going on in your home, so communicating is massively, massively important. Before I trained as a teacher, I was a teaching assistant for quite a long time, and if I'd gone off with a student to teach them something and then I'd brought them back and they had done it or they hadn't done it, I would still share it with the teacher, and I would still say, well, that worked or that didn't work. Hey, this is what worked in that situation. This didn't work, so I switched it to this. And that's what you need to do, whether you, for better or for worse, send it in with some information as to what worked, what didn't, because that's how the teacher will get to the stage where they're going, right, okay, in this situation, that child needs something different to what they did when they were in the classroom, because actually there's more going on or less going on, because you've got this opportunity to give one-to-one potentially with your child, you might actually be able to bring out strengths that the teacher possibly can't when they're in a class of 30 odds. So share what's working, because actually if that's working for you, and then somebody else the other parent comes on and says, I'm struggling with this, they can say, another parent has done this and that's worked for them. So remembering that this should be collaborative. You're working with your class teacher, with the school, to bring out the best in your child. But it's a joint responsibility, and you must share it, for better or for worse, share what works. And with regards to evidencing learning, it can be really difficult, actually, to sort of if you've got children who are not necessarily sat down learning traditionally, but they are up and doing things. They're playing Uno with you, or they're baking with you. Baking is brilliant because there's weights and measures, there's reading, there's collaborative work, there's all sorts of things in there. If you're if your child is measuring out this, that and the other, you take a photograph of that and you annotate it. That is evidencing learning, and that is what we as teachers do.
Yeah, so they could even make an advert for what they've baked. So they could make it like an A4 sheet, and they could draw a picture of it and try and sell it as if it was going to be in a shop or something like that. So there's ways that you can sort of work from something that you've made like that. I was going to mention little boy, well, he's 10, that I know, and he has autism spectrum, and he's on the autism spectrum, and he really likes making stop motion animations. And so that's his thing, and he loves making stop motion animations. It's not actually something that a teacher will probably set for the whole class to do, but if he can show that he's learnt something by making a stop motion animation, that would be brilliant. And I'm sure the teacher would be absolutely thrilled to get maybe not what they set, but a different interpretation of what they were asked to look at. So I think that's worth looking at what your child's really turns on by, and see if you can steer it towards something topic based, towards what they've been learning at school.
Absolutely. Use their special interests, use the things that are engaging them to evidence learning, because that's equipping you and the teacher with what they need to move forward. Boundaries and expectations. For our most complex young people, I was talking to one of my clients earlier in the week. She is a mum with ADHD, and she's got children with a combination of ADHD and autism. And she was telling me that her daughter was refusing to do schoolwork. And then one day she was in the garden with Daddy, and they were clearing out the shed. And just on the hop, because Daddy's probably neurodiverse too, they came up with this idea of actually making the shed into a school environment for their child, and there was great fun had over the course of the weekend setting that area up as the child's school, and then there was a real shift in the child. So she was able to get up in the morning. She didn't put on a school uniform, but she was able to get up in the morning and go to school, and she even put signs around the house going school this way with arrows pointing to which way she had to go to school, which just goes to show that what she needed was a zone to go to. So, you know, it can be very difficult for children because home is home and school is school. And now they've become this one thing. That's going to be really, really, really difficult. And what can you do to make that easier? So for her, that was what worked. That particular family, they've got that going on, and they've now got sort of like a set zone for doing that. And of course they're going to come into the house to do baking rather than that, but it made the child feel more comfortable. So you've got to think outside of the box with these things.
It might be worth in a situation like that also exploring the possibility again of speaking to the teacher, or even getting a line of communication between the child and the teacher, so the teacher can say, look, I can't teach you at the moment I can't teach you face to face at the moment. So I'm going to give your mum or your dad or the person that looks after you some work for you to do. And it's okay for you to do that work with them and not me for the moment.
I think particularly for children with autism, it'd be really good to have that conversation with school, and sort of like that actual kind of almost handover.
Yeah. Which they never got to have because there was so little warning it was going to happen in the first place. I think schools would have done a lot more to prepare children who are neurodiverse and other children who are in sort of precarious situations for the situation if they'd had the opportunity at all, and it just happened so fast that it wasn't possible.
Yep. Boundaries and choices. We can't say to our children, you don't have to do schoolwork at home. Unfortunately, that was kind of okay when we thought they were going to be off for a week, for 3 weeks, sorry. But you know, anything past that, we can't let children just opt out. We have to do something with them, and there can be alternates. So you can give them choices. Are you doing this or are you doing this? This is what you get to choose right now, because children need a sense of agency. But those boundaries must be in there, and that's massively, massively important.
Yeah, so a boundary for a child isn't necessarily just a limit, it's actually a safety net as well. So if I gave the example of learning to ride a bike, a child might get so far on stabilizers, and then eventually they are finding that far too easy and they need the boundaries to be shifted. And so we could respond to that by just not allowing bike riding because it's too dangerous to ride without stabilizers. Or we could help them and we could kind of cocoon them a bit during that, or we could be quite encouraging but let them go a little bit, or we could just let them do it on their own. So the middle two aspects are probably the ones that most parents choose. They help them somewhat to learn, and then the child learns to ride their bike. But if we say no, or if we say yes but I'm not helping you, that could lead to fear and anger and frustration and not understanding why. So the boundary for a child is just so important because it gives them a point to which they can go safely.
Sorry. I was trying to admit somebody and I can't do that at the same time as looking at the slides. So exactly that. And that choices thing is really, really important. They get to choose between one, two, three things. Two or three things, but they don't get to choose to not. And you know what? Sometimes that choice can be now or later, and it can also be let's have a game of Uno, or do you want to bake first, or do you want to do your maths first? So it's having sort of like a variety of things in there. So they've got agency, but you are still in control, and they need that. They need you to be leading them.
They do.
Not ruling them, leading.
Yeah, they will be sort of fearful about why there's no control if it's not there. Something like a device that a child doesn't want to give up it's quite a good example of a reason why giving them a choice is so useful. Because if you just say, I'm taking that, then they're going to get cross about it. But if you say, either you can give it to me or you can put it away, a child probably will choose to put it away themselves rather than give it to you. But it is their choice and they're going to have to live with that themselves. So it usually works quite well. I've had to do that in school a number of times, and rather than just swiping it, giving them that choice and then allowing them to put it in their bag or something is usually diffuses the situation.
Not every time, but the majority.
No, not always.
We don't live in a perfect.
Worth a try.
Okay. I did that one already. I'm on the wrong slides. Okay, sorry. The learning environment, so setting the scene, what I was talking about with regards to having a zone for that, whether it's the dining table, whether it's the kitchen counter, whether it's the shed at the bottom of the garden, whether it's your spare room, whatever it is, having that sort of setting the scene that this is the zone that you go into to do that particular learning. It doesn't have to be set in stone, because Ruth was saying that her children prefer to move around the house and to do things at different times and different places. So different children, different things, but setting the scene so they understand this is, I'm in the school zone rather than home zone right now is really, really important. Setting time or tasks. That's really, really important, because if you want a child to sit down and settle to task, but you haven't told them when they get to leave that task and move on to something more pleasurable or to the next task, yeah. There's can be quite a lot of anxiety attached to that. So setting those sort of like clear boundaries and expectations on them straight from the beginning, and saying, once you have done this, or when it gets to that time. So telling them that means they know when this ends, which just reduces anxiety, lets them know where they stand, and they're able to sort of, that should help to get them engaged in learning in the first place, you know. And have they had enough to eat? Have they had enough to drink? Have they had enough sleep? These things are all really important. They're not, and are there lots of distractions around? Is the telly on in the background? Please don't have the telly on in the background when you're trying to teach your children anything. Music maybe, if that's what works for them, or whatever it happens to be, but don't have the telly on in the background. It's a really, really bad idea.
Yeah, and if you've got another child who's working, maybe they're using the computer and it's a program that makes noises. So both of my daughters have games that they've been set by school to play. A pair of headphones in the device just takes that noise distraction away, so that it's not going to be a point of contention. So I have had to do that with my children, and it really, really helps. Yeah, I've got one child who I tutor, and it became very, very swiftly clear that he didn't really cope very well with just doing a lesson where he didn't know what was going to happen. So we chunk it up into 15-minute slots. He's 11, and we chunk it so that he's got 15 minutes of this, 15 minutes of this, 15 minutes of this, and then 15 minutes of review and tidying up what we've been doing. And he knows that structure, and every time we do a lesson we have that structure, so that it's really, really helped. He was very reluctant, very resistant to start with, and now he's quite amenable, and we have a good rapport and we get on well. So it's really made a difference just to have those chunks that he knows are going to happen every time.
So that comes lovely down to the now, next, and then. Now we're doing this, then we're doing that, and then after that we're doing that. So now, then, next. Children benefit enormously from knowing what you want from them, and those things can be, there's a real need for a bit of variety as well. So some children really love online sort of games and resources that are educational, and some don't, but actually whether they like them or not, an element of them is a really good idea, but too much of them is not such a good idea. As I say, you're all doing the best you can with what you have and what you know, but sort of saying, right, we're going to do this and then this and then this. But if it's necessary to switch those around because the needs of that child in that particular morning are different to what they were yesterday, which is often the case with our neurodiverse children, you can negotiate moving them around so the child has agency. They they still can't opt out completely, or and if they are opting out, if they really can't do it in the there and then, and I mean can't rather than won't, then saying, do you know what, we'll start again this afternoon, is something that can happen. But you can't let children get into the habit of thinking they can get away with not doing their work. That can't happen. If then rules are really, really useful to have. If we can get this done in this time, there's an extra bonus of, if you don't switch that, if you don't do as I've asked and put that away, then that will happen. So having if then rules is a good thing to have. And scanning for distractions, as I say, about the television being on, it might be the radio is on, it might be that the postman keeps ringing the bell, it can be all sorts of things that you're sort of like expecting. So if you're expecting a Tesco's delivery midway through delivering your child's education and working yourself at the same time, it can be really, really difficult. Now, you can't eliminate distractions completely, and children with ADHD, for example, whether you like it or not, are going to get distracted. There's no way of getting away from the fact that children with ADHD are going to get distracted during their learning. It's a question of managing that distraction, making it easy for them to come back to task. So that's another reason to have the now, then, next, and maybe sort of like 3 steps of what you're wanting them to do in that session. So sort of steps to success, 3 things that you need to do in this session, this, and this. Because if they're then distracted, they can come back to it very, very easily. So you won't.
Yeah, I'd also say, and I think this is quite important for children with ADHD and other similar conditions, is that if you are going to set them steps, write them down, put them down so that they are clearly visible and can be looked at any time during the time that you want them to learn, because they will find it difficult to hold more than one thing in their head at once. And so if you've got a list of things you want them to do write them down and make it clear so that they can refer back to that.
Yeah, because then you're managing the distraction rather than eliminating it, because eliminating it isn't possible. And in teacher terms, we call that scaffolding. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about rewards just quickly there. And I use rewards for my children. They're 4 and 7, but also I've got a 15-year-old that I work with, and he's got a reward structure as well for the lessons that I'm teaching him. I'm very proud of him. He's working online at the moment. I never thought he'd manage it, but he's doing brilliantly. But his parents have just given us a structure where they give him rewards if he gets more than a certain number of points over the course of a week. My children have to cross a bridge every day, so they've got little people and they go across the bridge. We blue tack them onto the bridge and they have to cross the bridge. My mum actually used to work in education, so she gave me that, but it's been brilliant because they know that they've got to get dressed before they start learning, so they get a step for that, and they have to brush their teeth and they get a step for that, and they have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different learning tasks, and they get a step for each one of those. And there's a couple of other things like eating some fruit, and they get a step for those as well. And if they've done them all, they get something quite small, maybe a go on the Nintendo DS or an ice lolly or something that they want, and it works brilliantly. And likewise, the 15-year-old is motivated by slightly different targets, but he still seems to be really responding to that reward system.
That'd be the purple dots. That'd be the purple dots.
Purple dots?
Yes.
I don't know what the purple dots are.
Okay, I thought we might be speaking about a client that we have in common who is working to purple dots. He has to gain purple dots to as his steps, and when he's got so many, he gets some sort of reward.
Yeah, it's definitely working. I don't know if it's the same person, but it's definitely working for him.
It does. I think it works for the majority of because it's that acknowledgement they've done something right rather than a punishment for doing something wrong. And
catch them being good. That's something that teachers learn very quickly. Catch them being good.
Yeah, catch them being good and reward them being good, and they don't lose those dots or those steps because they did something else. They might have to there may be another consequence, but they don't lose the benefit of having done the right thing, because otherwise what's the motivation to do the next right thing?
Yeah, and my youngest daughter finds it quite difficult to apologise, so she might even get a step forward if she does give a genuine apology if she makes a mistake.
I've got one like that. Does not like to acknowledge that she was wrong. which obviously she never is. Special interests, particularly for your children with autism, because actually, you know, that they can have quite intense interests. And as long as you're not overdoing it and surrounding everything in their special interest, because do you know what? They're even though that can be their sort of like their main focus for thing, and it can be a driver and it can work sometimes. If it's always loaded in that, then you'll struggle to get them to function when that isn't there. But if there's a particular subject that's challenging for them and they happen to like Formula One, there is no reason you can't print that out with a with a border on it with Formula One around it, or they have got a writing task to do, and there's a way of changing that writing task to their special interest, because ultimately, as long as you're getting on paper or however else you're recording it, that child, that they're learning, it doesn't matter if it's got a border on it that's got Formula One on it or whatever the special interest happens to be. So with regards to autism, that can be particularly helpful in getting them through. Use it for their harder tasks, not for all of their tasks. So if they find maths really easy, don't use it for maths, keep it for literacy, or vice versa. Manageable steps, success breeds success. So if you've given a child something to do and they've been able to do it, and you're able to praise them for it and say that's brilliant, don't overdo it, because that's not helpful, but to sort of acknowledge them, to give them a purple dot, to give them a step, whatever it is, that means they can move on to the next thing, and success breeds success. So what they believe they can do something, they're going to be more able to do it. If they believe they can or they believe they can't, they are right.
Yes.
And then the objecting and the moaning and the refusing. There is always a reason that children say no to things. And we have to be sort of thinking about that as well. So in teacher training, we look at Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. And actually, if you look at that, you've got the anxiety zone, you've got the boredom zone. That's kind of most of it. There's only this thin sliver that goes to the middle, and that can be incredibly narrow for our children with differences. And, you know, we aren't always, even as teachers, I can tell you, we don't always get that right. And so we have to sort of like go with the child on that day. What they can do one day, they might not be able to do the next day. What they can do in one subject doesn't mean they'll be able to do the same in another subject.
Yeah, and it's so dependent on all sorts of outside circumstances. How in school it might be sort of how they're getting on with their friends, but at the moment it might be how they're getting on without their friends. It might be that they're not sleeping. It might be that they're not eating properly, or that, you know, they've got a tummy ache, or there could be all sorts of reasons why on that particular day it's a lot more difficult. So you might think, oh well, yesterday it was fine, we did this, why are you not cooperating today? But it's always worth having that conversation about how they're feeling bodily and how they're feeling mentally and emotionally as well, because there is usually a reason. As a very lovely lady that I used to work with, and she was amazing at this. She worked in what we called the green room at our school, and she still cares so deeply about the children that she used to work with in the green room. But she would take them out of lessons, and they would go there, and she would talk them through this stuff, and then she would report back to us, thank goodness, because that really, really helped us to know what to do. But obviously now that the children are at home, we have to be the lady in the green room and the teacher and the parent. So it's very, very difficult to do that. And if you're getting anywhere near succeeding, then you're doing an amazing job, because it's very hard, and it takes a lot of experts in a normal setting to help these children.
So this is the sort of thing where Ruth was saying about maybe they do the last 10 questions or the first 5 questions, depending on where they are on things. But then, of course, they can get themselves into the comparison trap. So, you know, take a pair of scissors to the worksheet and just cut those ones out, or copy and paste it, whatever, if that's what works. Whatever you need to do.
This is my 4-year-old. She just wants to say hello, and she's going to go away.
Welcome to the working world of
Go and get it, and off you go.
That's real life right now, and that's happening a lot too. do, people who are in there working from home. I think that's a webinar for another day. Right, so yeah, going on from what Ruth just said, in terms of emotions, I wanted to talk to you about the zones of emotional regulation, and I've got a couple of resources on here that were available, readily available from the TESS website. On the next slide you'll see a link to them, and you can look at those. Most things on the TESS website are free or very, very cheap. And you know, this enables you to be quite, this one allows you to be quite specific with your child. No zone of regulation is the wrong zone, they're just in the one that they're in. Nothing, then there's no emotions are wrong. So this is another way, and I've just sort of put an arrow in, but actually on the resource that's on the TESS website, the link is just down the side there, you will see. And I will send these slides out if you want me to. So you can download something like that, and you can change the bits on the bottom because your child is different to everybody else's child. But you know, children really struggle to communicate how they're feeling. So the first step in all of this is always to get them to you name it. It looks to me like you're feeling a bit hyper, or you're feeling a bit sad. And they will then eventually learn to say, Mummy, I feel like this, or Daddy, I feel like that, or Nanny, I feel like that, eventually. But you have to lead it to begin with, sort of say what you see until they're able to say it for themselves, and then have strategies for how to deal with those emotions. Remembering at all times that no emotion is wrong or bad. We are supposed to feel. No, it is not wrong to feel. It is how we react to our feelings that we have to have some level of control over. So as I say, children need to be taught how to recognise and name their emotions first, and that comes from you first. You do it first, and you can say, do you know what, today I'm feeling a little bit tired, so I'm going to find this a little bit harder today, which means if you're modelling that, your children are going to be quicker to do that themselves. I'm actually feeling a bit tired, Mum, and it's like, okay, you know, that's fine. We'll maybe take it a little bit easy, but maybe we'll sort of switch that and have break between there and there rather than there and there. But they're communicating it to you, but you have to encourage them to do it first. You have to model it first. And then when things go wrong, the bits in orange are when things have gone wrong. You do need to be able to listen to your child. You need to validate how they're feeling before you're ever going to be able to get them to understand it from your perspective. It's validation first. I understand that's how you see it. Can I explain the rest of the situation to you and how it looks from the outside on my side of things? Stay really open. It's a two-way street. That's how we recover, and that's how to get through these things together. Then setting boundaries and expectations. I do understand why you were upset and angry, but of course you understand just as well as I do that it's not okay to throw things across the room, whatever it happens to be. And that's never going to be okay, even though I do understand why you did it. We have to work together to find ways so that you don't get to that point in the first place. We are in it together, no matter what. I've got a son with ADHD who's 17 now, bless him. When he was in year 5 was a particularly challenging time for us. And one day, on a whim, I bought a cuddly dog in a shop that I would just happen to be in, having coffee. And I took it home and I gave it to my son and I said, this is no matter what, because I want you to know something. Things are hard right now, but it will get better because we're in this together no matter what. He's 17, no matter what, still sleeps in his bed. We need to be letting our children know that we are in it with them. I'm trying not to get emotional now. No matter what, we're in it together, we're a team. I see parents getting into a tug of war with their children, and my advice is always drop the rope and get on the same side. Align yourself with your child rather than against them. You're not in a tug of war with your children. It happens a lot. I've done it. And that's when you kind of like get your oppositional defiance disorders coming out. Thankfully with Will, we kind of managed to curb that with his sister, who exhibited her ADHD very differently. She isn't particularly oppositional, but she hates being told what to do, and that does bring out oppositional traits in her. And 65% of children with ADHD also meet the diagnostic criteria for oppositional defiance disorder as a secondary condition that has developed because it is ADHD plus environment that causes oppositional defiance disorder. So yeah, as parents and as professionals, we often have to sort of like check ourselves and think, have I got myself into a tug of war with this child? And if the answer is yes, you have to drop the rope and get on their side. And that's how you get them around to your way of thinking. You join them so that they can join you.
Yes, my youngest daughter is she can sort of display as quite defiant and wanting to do things her own way, and quite often she's just gone and problem solved. She wants to sort it out herself. It's about opening up that conversation. So, why are you doing that? Can you tell me why you're doing that? So the other day she took her little chair out into the garden. She took down a bird feeder from the bird table, and it was a bird feeder that's designed for fat balls, not for seeds. But she went and got the seeds, and she tipped a load of seeds into the bird feeder indoors, and then she was there in the room with the bird feeder and the seeds all over the place when we found her. And I had to go, oh, don't get angry, try and understand why she did this, because actually she just wanted to feed the birds, and she just made a decision and she went with it. She wasn't trying to be naughty, but she could have got really angry and defiant and cross if I'd have reacted angrily. And so I've really had to learn to check that impulse.
You were saying the other day about when your older one had got cross because there were too many distractions, and she was in that zone of proximal development. She was right on the border of what she could do independently, and there were lots of distractions around, and you got a negative behaviour as a result of that. And rather than condemning the behaviour, you said you kind of like took a different view on it.
Yes, definitely. Yes, asking her what was going on. And it's very difficult when you've got multiple children who you're trying to keep them all going at once, whatever you're trying to keep them doing, because you might be juggling 3 different children's zones of proximal development at the same time. That's nigh on impossible. It's very difficult.
You're still trying to work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of us are still trying to work as well. I think in a classroom as a teacher, you might actually decide to stop the activity and do something else. If the class are getting really restless and finding it very difficult to focus, you might end up putting on some music. You might end up just stopping them what they're doing and doing a refocusing activity. So quite often we would a lot of my experiences were year 5 and 6, and we would sort of stand up and do something physical, do some what we call brain gym with them for a few minutes before we sat down again, just to reset.
And when you're doing that, you're teaching them a good life skill, because actually, no matter where they are in their life, no matter how old they are, actually, you know what, I seem to have lots of 17-year-olds that I work with at the moment. I don't know why, I just do at this precise moment in time. And they use these things, and it's like sort of like saying, you know, it's actually okay to just sort of like put it down and just go and lap around the garden for 5 minutes, or go and get yourself a drink of water, or go and find your nearest relative and get yourself a hug. Take 5 minutes out. These are life skills that we just kind of like taking for granted, but actually our children need them massively.
Yeah, in an office you'd probably just go to the toilet, right?
Yes, and in school that's often one of the things when they're sort of like, it's often a sign of anxiety or ADHD, actually, when they're kind of like regularly getting up and going to the toilet in lessons when they don't really need the toilet, they just needed a timeout, and it's a socially acceptable way of getting one. Can't or won't. We have to assume they can't before we assume that they won't. And always look for barriers in them achieving what you've asked of them, rather than assuming that they won't. Sometimes they just won't, but there's almost always, to the point where I'd say always, a reason why they won't. And actually with pathological demand avoidance, which goes alongside autism, that's an extreme end. Even when they want to, they can't. It's a real can't, even when they want to. So I've got an older client who every time his mum says anything to him, his first response is no. And even though he wants to go to look at that engineering college, he can't make himself do it because he's got pathological demand avoidance. So it's an automatic no. And so actually he can't. And so there's like a lot of work to be done. And that's why he's my client, because we've got to work on that. Okay, how do we get past that? Because actually he's halting his life. So there are reasons that children do things. And obviously that's an extreme part of it. But we always have to be looking at barriers to achieving and trying to work out what they can't do before we ever assume that they won't. So always be solution focused, and don't get yourself in a tug of war. Drop the rope. Clearly sometimes we're going to get into a tug of war with our children, but if that is your general way of operating, you need to drop the rope and get on their team. I put this in because actually Whether you're a parent or whether you're a teacher, there's two things there. Dr. Ross Green has a lot to say, and he doesn't particularly write about neurodiversity. What he writes about is understanding children's motivations for behaving ways that you might not want them to behave. This is for the most extreme of our children, which is of course my area of expertise. For me, reading Dr. Ross Green and watching some of his webinars and things has taught me a lot. It's exactly the way I operate. It's like, you have to work with professionals, you have to work with parents, but actually you have to look at the children holistically and try to work out what is going on, and put some success steps in place for them. Online, I can't even see what I've written there because I've got the thing across the top. So variety is key with regards to the resources and the way that our children are learning, but Ruth's the expert on that, so I should just let her take over.
Oh, okay. Right, yeah, so variety is great. Hopefully if your school is giving you some work, it's not all the same subjects. Hopefully there's a number of different subjects, so even just from that starting point you've got variety, because you've got a choice of different things you can do. But there's obviously what we've talked about already with the online learning that's available. That gives you something where it's completely different from something written down. I personally think that a balance between online learning and offline learning is really good. So my daughter's school has sent them quite a lot that's online, and I've opted to print out a lot of what she's been given, because I just think it's different the way that she focuses when she's writing, and she's had work to do with fractions, and I think actually colouring in the fractions and not just looking at the fractions is much more useful. So we have that variety as well. So I'm just trying to find my notes.
I've used oranges and satsumas and things with children before when teaching.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Photos that you can annotate and say we worked this out using satsumas.
Like classic.
See that too.
Yeah, Jaffa cakes is a classic. Get the Jaffa cakes, because you can eat more than one Jaffa cake potentially in a sitting, so you could do more than one sort of fraction.
Satsumas are more healthy.
Oh, use Jaffa cakes and satsumas. They're all made of oranges. It's
or
fine.
Pizza, whatever it happens to be. Ruth, you set up a shop for one of your children, so you used play and experience to...
We did, yeah. I've got a couple of things written down here. I'm just trying to find my notes so that I can remember all the things I thought of. So the shop was great. So we had basically they had to do adding and taking away, the reception children that week, and my older daughter is just getting used to the idea of money as well. And so we set up a shop. They decorated the storefront. So she had this wonderful storefront that she'd made. We stuck it on 2 garden poles and attached it to a little table. And she went into the kitchen and I said, you can choose whatever you like. I don't mind, as long as if it's made of glass or something, you asked me to carry it. And she chose pesto and toilet rolls, which was hilarious, because nobody's got toilet rolls. So she chose about 3 toilet rolls, and we looked like we've been stockpiling, and an empty box of Easter egg, and she wrote prices on everything. And usually my little girl, she's only 4, she doesn't want to write anything. She wrote prices on everything. She stuck them all on with sellotape. So she did writing, she did drawing, she did a bit of construction, a bit of design to actually build the thing. And then she sold the stuff to us, and they were learning about sort of value for money. My older daughter was saying, well, £5 for a toilet roll is quite a lot, Dora. And Dora stuck to her guns on that one. She said that they should be £5, so they were £5. They were looking at the dates on the coins, so they could talk about how old the coins were. The older one was sort of working out how long the coin had been in circulation, so how many years. There was loads going on there, and certainly, most importantly, I think cooperation in the end, everybody working together. But we could let her get on with it, because she had that shop out about 3 or 4 more days afterwards. She set it up again and just used it as a game. So yeah, we used real money, we didn't use fake money.
Debate and discussion are really, 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 really powerful. With one of my children this week, she'd read a book, and we're talking about a dilemma within that book. So because we were doing that, we're deepening her learning, we're improving her speaking and listening skills, and all sorts of interaction with regards to that, and you know, really encouraging that engagement with reading. And then with my son, he was talking to me about, because he's just started his A-levels, he was talking to me, I think it was about his economics homework, and we had a really big discussion about you know, what that meant to him, and it was that really helps to deepen their learning. So it goes in on a deeper level. They must be like, the opportunity to discuss these things with you. That's really sort of like that communication with you is obviously very, very important. If you can embed that in their learning, embed their learning in that, then everyone's a winner. And it means you actually, like, you're really engaging yourself in their learning too, particularly with older ones, where it can be much harder to do. Your children are watching you at all times, and they're watching the telly, and having discussions with you about that sort of stuff is important too. Go on.
Yeah, there's a lovely site. There's a lovely site that I've seen used before in schools, but also had a look at it a couple of times at home, called Pobble, which has just a picture every day. Every day it's different. So each day of the year has a different picture, and the children are supposed to, in the schools that I've worked in, they kind of look at the picture and they have to respond to it in some way. So in one of the best examples of planning around that I'd seen, they had 15 minutes and they could write a story, or they could continue the story of the picture, or they could copy the picture, or, you know, they could write about one of the characters, or what the weather was like in the picture, sort of describe it. There was loads of different ways that you can just respond to the picture, and some of them are quite emotive. There might be like a scene of wartime, or something quite sad, or something quite stark and interesting. So it's quite a good jumping off point if you just want to practice speaking and listening skills, which are really important. I was just looking at one of the other ones that I've written down as well. We went for a walk, which of course is one of the only things we're allowed to do at the moment. My daughter and I went for a walk, but before we did, we looked at Google Maps and I showed her where we were going to go. So there's a bit of geography in there, but we also had a discussion about how far she thought a kilometre was. And she showed me, because we know the area quite well and she knows where things are, she showed me where she thought a kilometre was. And then we walked it, and we had a little buzzer that went off when we got to a kilometre. And we sort of discussed the difference between how far she thought it was and how far it actually was.
Nice investigation.
Yeah. And all the way around, we did a scavenger hunt, I think, as well, on a different day, on a similar walk, and we were trying to find different things that were in the community. So that was good.
Education looks however you want it to look, doesn't it? A combination of the traditional and the experiential, etc. Reading is massively powerful and should be encouraged wherever possible. And to a point, it doesn't really matter what they're reading, because this is the skills and then the discussions that go with that, rather than just expecting them to passively read, to be sort of like critical thinkers, as particularly as they get older, is really, really important. Just like, what do you think of that? Do you think that's right? You know, encouraging them to do that from young actually is really powerful stuff. I should have put drawing in there as well. I didn't, but we've got writing in there, we've got recording, visual or whatever. So we'll say drawing goes in under recording. You know, writing is massively important. Writing about what they have experienced is a really, really good skill.
And encouraging the use of interesting words as well. Try and if they've said bad, just say, well, is there another way you can say bad that shows the type of bad it was? So if it was just a bit rubbish, then you could say it was rubbish. Or if it was absolutely horrendous, that's a bit different, and the feeling of the sentence changes, and it's just about how you can play around with words, maybe get some of the words from a book that they've listened to or that have been reading themselves as well.
Yeah. Listening. So I've put that in there really because when Ruth and I were talking this through yesterday, I was talking about when I'd worked with a class and I'd used audiobooks as well as the physical book, because I was working with children who had a variety of challenges. So we used the audio version as well as the physical version, so they were able to either follow it by listening, follow it by reading, or a combination of the two. Then we'd read a bit and I could stop it and I could have a conversation with, oh, what do you think about that? What do you think happened there? And what do you think might happen next? So you can use things that they're listening to as well. Audiobooks are absolutely brilliant, particularly for children, well, for all children to be fair, but particularly for children who might have challenges of, this is another way of engaging in learning, particularly if your English is a second language. Actually using audiobooks is a really, really good way of helping them to engage differently.
At the moment, Audible has released their entire children's collection for free. You don't have to pay for a subscription to Audible to listen to all the children's books. So you can listen to, I'm trying to think which ones were there. The Wind in the Willows, Alice in Wonderland, those kind of stories, they were all available.
The Harry Potter ones is on there as well.
Yeah, the first Harry Potter's on there, with Stephen Fry reading it.
Mm-hmm. And recording learning can look differently. So obviously sometimes it's just going to be what they did on screen that you can then print out, or it might be something they have written, but it can also, you can use video and you can record them speaking about something. There's more than one way of recording learning and recording their thoughts, particularly if you've got children with dyslexia, being able to record them in an audio way that they may then choose to write from, or you may need them to write from, but capturing, if with creative writing, because I've got executive function challenges, and I'm on my 3rd master's degree, I'm a clever girl, but even at the age of 46, I had to think about how old I was then. The process of writing is quite clunky for me. It's very deliberate. I have to think about the content, the spelling and the grammar, the handwriting, the requirements of what I'm writing, because usually these days I'm writing to requirements, and actually that requires quite a lot of executive function. So actually, for our children who might be engaging in something like creative writing, getting their ideas down, so either they can tell you and you can physically record it, or you can make notes on it, which is a really good life skill that you're teaching them, that they can
scribe.
Yeah, you can scribe for them, but in an ideal world they will then be able to write it, but they can certainly do it better if their ideas have got out of their head first, because as someone with executive function challenges, if I can get the information out first and then edit it, it's so much easier for me. So
yeah, so an audio recording app on a phone as well could be something if somebody's working independently, but they've want to try and get the ideas out of their head, just get them to talk about it into an audio app first, so they've got a recording of all their thoughts.
Ruth kindly put together a list of resources that she might think were useful for you. As I say, I can send out these slides to all people who booked on, so that you've got access to those. And obviously, those, when I've used a reference or referred to something that was, those are on those individual slides, not on this list. So this is my lovely good friend Ruth, and that's how to get hold of her if you want to. And this is me. Questions. Celia, are there any questions on there? Can you unmute yourself or not? You might not be able to. Oh no. Oh, do you know what? If I stop the share, then I should be able to go to Celia. Hello.
Oh, hi, sorry, I'm now unmuted. We haven't had very many questions, but I mean, there are a couple of questions that we had from before. One of them was what you should do if you're really struggling to get a lot of feedback from schools. What do you do if you've got too much work and it's difficult to get through it? Are you sort of suggesting that would you just do some of the tasks, or how would you go about that if you don't really have much guidance and you're just swamped with work? Would you just stop? What would you do?
It depends on the age of the child a little bit, but I think if they're in primary, I would probably focus on maths and English if you could get anything done. Yeah. And then something that the child is going to enjoy doing from anything else that's there. But just never feel like you have to finish it all, because as I said earlier, that they really want the children to come back in one piece. They don't want them to come back a mess because they've been pushed to their limits and beyond.
We've got a few people saying they're just, the volume of work is just way too much.
Yes, it's too much for my older daughter.
Participating in a dialogue or able to. So would you advocate you'd focus on the key subjects, or would you try and cover everything but just do, you know, instead of, if it would actually take 5 hours to complete the task, would you just divide up the day and say you do a certain amount, prioritising
I think that it depends on the child to a large extent, because, you know, that different children are going to cope with things differently. I think it's very, very important to focus on mental health first, but learning can look differently. And you know what, if you can sit down with your child and in the realm of their choices, or within the realm of calling it school and calling it a lesson, play Uno with them, or something similar, that can then, that they will then quite quickly kind of, that's going to increase their stamina for sitting and learning, and it's like, brilliant, that's one lesson done, so we can tick that one off because that was a bit of maths, because it is, you know, because children can't opt out. You cannot allow them to opt out, but you can flex, and hopefully by flexing and engaging them in something that they are okay with, so baking, or whether it be playing a game of pool, if you're so fortunate to have that, and looking at the angles of that, whatever it happens to be, embed it in things that they are interested in until you can move it to things and challenge them that way. But you cannot say to children, it's okay, don't do any learning, that you're not, that's not a great life skill, amongst the fact that we don't want them to lose the skills that they had when they last had their day at school, and we need to be building wherever we can. We definitely don't want them to be going backwards, so we must be practicing what they know.
I mean, we've had one of the participants say that the message that they're getting pretty strongly from school is that all the work's got to be done, but actually it's too much, and, you know, so they're not really getting the don't worry, you know, just do what you can. They feel very pressured with, like, this is what you've got to get done. So it's kind of tricky, isn't it, when that's happening? You're not getting a sort of particularly supportive message tailored to your child.
It is, and I think it depends. I mean, if it's a child who's in year 10, you can sort of see the pressure on the other side of it. If they've got GCSEs coming up next year, that the teachers might be really concerned that if they don't cover this stuff, then they're not going to be able to pass them, but they're not going to be able to pass them if they're a mess either. And so it may be this is not the time for that amount of pressure at the moment for that person. And I think it need to keep that communication going, and try and with a level tone speak to the school and try and get them to see things a bit more from your point of view, because it's no good just breaking the relationship for the sake of them just continuing to pile on the pressure. Let them know what your concerns are.
Okay. And we've had questions as well about what to do if your children are finding the work really boring. What do you do? Is that where you're thinking that is that about tailoring the work? Is that about just finding out first why it's so boring? Is it because it's too easy, or what? But
it could be too easy, it could be too hard, and they could just be saying boring because they don't quite know how to say what it is. But, you know, embedding it in their interests, getting them up and moving. I know one mum who there were sort of like 10 maths questions, and she printed them out, or actually no, she didn't, she put them post-it notes in different places around the house.
That's a really good idea.
Did it as a sort of like a treasure hunt, and it was just like, okay, so by the time you've done those, and that will lead you to the next one, and then there was a treat at the end. So that was encouraging it's just making it more interactive, and meaning they're up and moving, you know, because sometimes we have to do the boring. You know, and so just doing what you can to differentiate for it. And if it really isn't working, and if it really isn't working, looking for other resources that tackle the same subject a different way. And teachers might want it done their way, but as I said before, teachers have never been expected to deliver an online education. They are learning, and some of them doing better than others, and that's just the reality of the situation. There hasn't been enough guidance, and I'm sure that will change, particularly if this is going to go on for any longer. There hasn't been the guidance, so there's a massive difference between what people are being told to do.
Yeah, not to try and make any excuses for any teachers in particular, because I have no idea who people might be dealing with, but there could be a situation where, as in my daughter's actually lost her teacher. So her teacher that she had until the end of the Easter term, she didn't know she was going to leave, my daughter, but she's gone, and there's no real explanation about where she's gone or why. Nobody's been told that. I don't know what the situation is at the school. They're not getting a new teacher till June, and so at the moment that she's being assigned work by the deputy head. She's been assigned a lot of work by the deputy head and the other member of staff for her year group, who doesn't have children, so possibly doesn't have a sort of parental perspective. But between the two of them, there's a lot of work. And the thing is, I think there, that the deputy head doesn't know that class. And so she's still done her best with a difficult situation. I think she has been responding, giving us really nice feedback, but it's not perfect. And I think that there could be all sorts of situations going on similar to that, where there's been a bit of a sort of pulling together of resources to try and plug a gap that hasn't worked for everybody.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then there's another question, focusing more on older children. There are some families whose children are doing GCSE work, and they're being told that whatever they're doing at the moment, it's not going to be covered again. So there won't be a chance to sort of, if you haven't quite got it, you won't be able to necessarily redo next year because they've got the rest of the programme to do. In that kind of situation, obviously pressure is high because you're worrying about, you've got an exam to sort of work towards. What would you suggest doing there? Because I think some of these, some of the families with these GCSE kids, the schools are really big and they don't necessarily have time to, the teachers don't necessarily have time to work through individual topics with kids. Yeah. What would you guys think of doing there? Is that where you need to look online for resources, or what do you do?
Well, speaking as the majority of my work in year 11, year 10 and 11 is maths, but also a bit of geography, and YouTube is brilliant for maths particularly. Corbett Maths is the one that is my go-to for maths. The guy that runs Corbett Maths, I don't know where he's found the time because he's a full-time teacher as well, but he's come up with a video that explains every single concept on the maths papers, foundation and higher. He's got daily practice of 5 questions at every level of GCSE, from the very, very lowest up to the top, that you can do. So there's 5 questions a day for every day of the year, and he's done that for primary as well, so somebody who's doing SATs could have the same resource, videos and daily practice and worksheets and textbook stuff. And so Corbett Maths is fantastic. It's on the set of links. It's not the only one, but I use it and it's great. There's a lot of stuff being re-released by the BBC that would help with some things like geography and history. There's some really good podcasts that could help with history out there as well. Really fantastic podcasts for history and other subjects as well, but history very well covered by that. So yeah, online I definitely think is a fantastic place to look.
My team's benefited an awful lot from Seneca, which is an online there's a free option, but there's also a paid option as well on that, and they use that for their GCSEs, and they also use it now for their A levels, and they swear by that, but they're learning independently at the moment, so I don't have to get involved, which means it must be really good.
And would you say that there's some comfort from the fact that, you know, would you say for GCSEs at some point when the work has been covered, will it be the case that all schools will have a period of time where they're doing revision work, or that you could hold on to as a bit of time, or is it literally just that the time really is now, so you can't rely on having a term where you're doing exam papers to prepare and catching up there? So really the time would be to really try and resolve it now, because I suppose in some subjects like maths, if you've not understood a concept and it builds on it later, you're then going to struggle, aren't you? So I guess
there are definitely some issues that the government are quite concerned about, the attainment gap, and I think they'll be doing everything they can. They'll be throwing the kitchen sink, and particularly at the GCSE students, and making sure that there isn't a gap. They mitigate that as best they possibly can We don't know what's going to happen, but those that do, we kind of, I guess, to some extent have to trust that they're going to put things in place. I know they're talking massively about the attainment gap. They're very concerned about that. So
a few years ago, there was funding available for people who were borderline SATs, as when I was teaching in a middle school, for borderline SATs children to have one-to-one tuition, regardless of their sort of financial circumstances at home at the moment. At this time, that's only really available for people who are in care and otherwise looked after, but it's possible that they may try and roll out something like that where they will pay for people to have a bit of extra help somehow within the schools. That's one way they can do it.
Some schools, and I don't know if that's more independent schools, but some schools have run for GCSE and A-level kids. You know, you could imagine a scenario where they could do a few extra revision days or something like that. That might be helpful. But it sounds like parents are best to just really look for online, use your resources links and look online to try and help kids. Maybe it's a question of trying to get kids to identify where they're struggling and where they don't understand, and then focusing on those topics to try and boost the understanding as soon as possible.
We're all doing the best with what we have and what we know, and obviously hopefully the list that Ruth has attached is helpful to people. You know, and as much as it's like the time is now, and of course we should be making the most of this time, but mental health first, emotional well-being first, and obviously families have got quite a lot on at the moment if we've got parents working from home. Ruth and I have got a friend, and her and her husband are both accountants, and they've got 2 children, and they're having to work a 7-day week, and they've agreed with their employer that they're not going to work 9 till 5 because that's the time when they're supposed to be delivering an education. So one of them's doing mornings, one of them's doing afternoons, but they're both having to work 7 days a week. Now that's not sustainable for the long run, you know, but every family must do it their way as much as they have to do it their way. You know, we have to family first. You have to make sure everyone is okay, everyone's needs are met, because if people's needs are not met, the rest isn't going to happen. And so we can say all we like, now is the time, and of course it is in an ideal world, but there is so much going on at the moment, so much uncertainty, that I think that's just a lovely rhetoric and a lovely perfect utopia, but we don't live in that world.
Yeah, I know. I know we're running out of time. We've got a couple more questions. We've got a question about you know, we mentioned mental health, and there's a parent who's trying to support their child with their mental health, but finding that, you know, school and maybe other family members aren't that supportive of that. They just think, they're just looking and saying, haven't you done all the work, kind of thing. So what would you sort of be saying for parents to sort of, who've had to spend time working with their kids' well-being and mental health, that's led to them not being able to do as much schoolwork or whatever? What's the way for parents to articulate that to school and maybe family members or parents who are resident with the child? Have you got any ideas or tips for that, really?
I would always say we don't need to own the judgment of others. People can have their opinion, but they are just their opinions. We do not need to own that, and we should never allow the opinions of other people to influence the way we are handling our children. You know, when people give you feedback, you take from it what is beneficial. You know, if someone makes a suggestion that's going to work, take that, but just let the judgment go. You don't need to own that at all. If somebody's what they're saying to you isn't positive, you know, Ruth said earlier about her mum doing some reading with the kids. Maybe that's the answer. Okay, Auntie Lord, who's having a bit of a moan at me, why don't you come online and you read to him and deliver a lesson? That will give me a chance to catch up with the other child, and then we'll swap over and you can do that. You know, if you can like hand some of that responsibility to that judgy family member, they might be quiet or they might actually help. But you don't need to own the judgments of other people. And with regards to school and pressure that comes from them, you still can only do the best that you can with what you have and what you know. You can ask for help. You can say this is difficult. And as I said at the beginning, you know, when one of my coaches messaged her students and said, thank you to those who've sent in your work. the rest please send it in. And then that's when she found out that 15-year-old was now caring for a 13-year-old and 11-year-old, and one parent who was home from hospital with COVID, having been sent home, having been admitted with the coronavirus, and still had one relative in hospital. So, you know, until you communicate with the school don't know what to put in place for children. So communication is everything, but don't own judgment. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
No, and I think that if I had a student last year, bless her, she had terrible anxiety and a few other things that she was dealing with. She had a lot of time off school, and we purposely made the lessons really short. So even though I was going to her house, it was much shorter than other students were having. So it may not be possible, but if it is possible to just do short bursts, you know, 10 minutes even, a little bit, and then leave it, or do a little bit later if it works well, you know, just try doing a small amount, a very, very manageable amount, and work from there, and see if you can that might boost the self-esteem, not only of yourself but also of the child as well, and open the door to very kindly doing some learning together.
And if you kind of needed to evidence that your child has been struggling with mental health, I mean, GPs are offering telephone appointments in many areas. Yeah. So is that a way you would recommend, if you're really struggling and you just can't get very much done, to actually just get something from your GP to say, look, I know I've spoken to this parent, this child is very anxious.
Gosh, I find it hard to get my head around any school not acknowledging that at the moment. But
yeah, I mean, it feels
that's necessary.
Yeah,
you know, you could get the school to speak to the child.
Yeah,
at the beginning, it's, you know, some children would benefit enormously from having a conversation with the teacher to say, you know, how are you? Depends on the teacher though, because, you know, some are more warm than others.
It may not need to be the teacher that teaches them the subject. It may need to, you know, there may be a student support worker that they know, that they trust, that gets on with them. They may feel that a lot of people at the school are not on their side. Maybe ask the child whether there is somebody who they feel is on their side, that they would go to for support, and see if you can get hold of that person, even if they're not really anything to do with the educational side of their schooling. They're very much potentially to do with the emotional well-being side, and that is a huge part of our job. That's one of the things that we're there for, is to look after the children and help them with their emotional well-being. It's not just to make sure that they know their trigonometry, it's also to make sure that they grow into a rounded individual.
Teachers didn't go into education just to deliver a curriculum. They went in because they want to see children develop.
No, that's lovely. And then just a final question,
because
it's just been a theme that I think we've seen and heard at other times. There are parents who feel that that whatever differentiation and support, physical support in the classroom, obviously for kids with SEN, isn't necessarily being delivered now. So we've got a question saying there's a feeling that the sort of SEN support has really sort of disappeared a little bit, obviously because of the situation we're in. So is there anything that parents should be expecting with schools where their children have SEN, or how can we as parents prompt schools a little bit with what we're struggling with, or what should we expect?
I'd say if there is anything that the child usually uses when they're at school, maybe like a different coloured overlay or different coloured books, or an angled desk or anything like that, which they haven't got at home, that does help them, or special pencils. Ask for those things if you haven't got them, because actually they can make such a massive difference to how well the child can learn. And it also, we're talking about that, the girl that has the office at the end of the garden, you know, if you bring some of the things that she uses at school into that office, it feels even more like a school experience. So that those things could really help, and the school will have funding to get that stuff for the child. So if the child hasn't got it at home, then ask for it. Because you may very well find that they will just give it to you, and they didn't know that you didn't have it because it just wasn't one of the things on the list of things that they had to get ready on that day that they had to get things ready. Yes, that's one suggestion, definitely. The other thing is, do they have anything that they use in school? So one of the things that the SEN children use quite a lot at my school in all subjects was something called a word mat, or a learning mat. And you can download these online. There's tons of them. If you look up learning mats, you'll find millions of them. You can get them for different topics, so ancient Egyptians learning mats, and adjectives learning mats. So you could have a whole system of these, and you just have them out, and they're there underneath like a table mat when the child is working, and then they can, you know, if they struggle to find the vocabulary they need when they're writing, there's a list of it there, and it's all in different colours, and it's accessible. So that's another option.
Okay, great. And we did have a question as well about specifically resources for English, but I think you've got those on the resource. We've got those on the resource list, haven't we?
What was the question? I'm not sure.
About resources online for English.
Right.
Some kids, a child who's finding maths, for example, really easy to do, but finding English a lot more difficult. So I think that's on the resource list already, isn't it?
Yeah, there are some things on there. I might have a little bit of a dig and see if I can give some more to Jannine, and she can send them out to people if I find anything else that's useful.
I can update that slide before I send them out. That's not a problem.
Okay, so I think I've tried to cover all the questions. I think if anyone still has questions, then or feels that something isn't yet covered fully, because obviously we can't get completely into the details of every situation. They can contact you guys directly.
What I will do after this is I will send out a questionnaire on feedback from the session, but then there'll be another one that maybe actually I might incorporate it into that one, sort of like other questions and suggestions for future webinars. So you can ask, and then we'll do our best to address those as best we can, because obviously we're both still working and raising children, so we'll do what we can.
Yeah, brilliant. And I just had a quick question. The resources you're gonna send an email out with links to the slides and everything.
Yeah, probably this evening, once I've had a chance to, Ruth and I've had a chance to confer and add anything else that we think is useful. We will send out the slides with the link for the survey.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I think we've hopefully covered all the questions. That's been really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, it'd be lovely to hear from you all in the future. And as I say, you're doing your best with what you have and what you know, and that's all anyone can ask of you.
Yeah.
All right.
Brilliant.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.